proponents of the intelligent design or the creationism, or just people who attack the idea of abiogenesis as presented by science, use two contrasting arguments to say that the universe could not possibly have led by random events the formation of life. They say first that the universe was fine-tuned for life on Earth, and that life on Earth must have been created because of that. But on the other side, they say something completely opposite to that same idea, and they say that life is impossible on Earth, and the universe, the chances of life are so small that therefore life must have been created. Now, that doesn't make sense. Either the universe is fine-tuned for life, in which case it is easy for life to have occurred on Earth, or you're saying that the life is impossible, and that must have been help. So the two ideas are oxymoron to each other, and yet they're two coexisting ideas of the people who are proponents of intelligent design. So that in itself is a logic argument that doesn't make sense. But what I wanted to talk about is those two aspects. Let's see, first of all, is the universe fine-tuned for life? Well, I see a universe that has things like gamma ray bursts and supernova explosions and traveling black holes and, ultraviolet radiation and solar flares and all kinds of things that could destroy the Earth entirely. And we've been very lucky, if anything, to actually have not been destroyed by now. And you also have things like natural disasters on Earth. You have comet strikes, meteor strikes, you have volcanic eruptions, weather disasters, earthquakes, and a lot of other things that could possibly cause the destruction of life. Then you have the oxidative nature of the atmosphere. If you have a lot of things that have to be perfect and a lot of things that could actually destroy life. If anything, the universe is not fine-tuned for life at all. I would say that the universe is fine-tuned for the destruction of life. So that in itself already counter-argues that point entirely. There is no perfect creation. Now, of course, a lot of people would say that there used to be a perfect creation, but that, sin or other things like that brought destruction to the world, and that's what we're seeing now. There is no evidence that the universe was ever different from the way it is right now, and those things, such as black holes and gamma ray bursts and supernova, were always around since the beginning of the universe, and there's nothing to indicate that there was ever a time when they weren't around. So there certainly is no evidence to support the fact that life on Earth was made to be. And in fact, if anything, the universe is out to destroy things. So that idea of the universe being fine-tuned for life doesn't make sense. But then let's talk about the contrasting argument that also is presented by them, that the odds of life are nearly zero, and therefore it needs help to actually have occurred, which, see, doesn't make sense with the other argument that they just presented. But anyways, it's true. With all those things which are out there to destroy life, it's really hard for life to occur. And on top of that, you have to have a perfectly sized planet. You have to be exactly in the right distance from the star. The star has to be exactly the right type of star, so it's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's not too big, it's not too small. Gravity has to be just right in the planet. You have to have just the right amount of water, the right amount of weather patterns. You can't have too many big planets around to screw up the gravity. The moon, to facilitate the tides, which actually do help life. There's only one moon, makes the tidal effects be exactly right. The atmosphere of the Earth seems to be exactly right. You have the geology of the Earth is exactly right. The form, the shapes of the Earth are most exactly right. Everything on Earth seems to be so perfect for life. It's almost as if the Earth is designed, yes, for life, perhaps. Well, the odds of the universe forming something like that are so astronomically small that it must have been created, is what the argument is. That life itself is so impossible that the chances of that occurring by chance are nearly zero. So I may shock you right now, but I'll say that that's absolutely true. The chances of the Earth being the way it is and of life actually starting on Earth are so astronomically small that when you look at the cosmos and everything that needs to occur for life to occur on Earth, the chance of that is the same thing as zero. That number is so astronomically small that it must be equivalent to zero. But here's the thing about science and statistics and math. Even if the chance is minuscule, as long as it's not actually zero, even if it is 0.0000000, put 100 zeros and then put a 1, a smallest number you can possibly imagine, if that number is not zero, then there is a chance. Now, no matter how small the chance is, if you have enough tries, anything can possibly happen. Let me give you an example. Winning the lotto seems to be something very hard to do. The chance of that is very small. But if you were to buy 1 million lotto tickets, your chances of winning are extremely high because you have a lot of the chances in your favor. So while it's true that life itself, as it is on Earth, is very, very unique and very, very small chance of occurring. When you calculate the chances of all the cosmic events and Earth events and life events to have occurred the way they have occurred are so astronomically small. On the other hand, when you consider the number of stars, with the number of planets in it, with the number of galaxies and the number of places in the universe, there are thousands of planets around millions of stars, around billions of galaxies around the universe. There is that number is so ginormous. And the universe is 15 billion years old. Well, that's an exaggeration. It's between 13 and 15 billion years old. There's been so much time in so many different spaces that there have been so many different attempts for life that, in fact, even though the chances of life on Earth are astronomically small, I would actually argue that the chances of life being only on Earth are astronomically small. Even though that number is ginormously small, the universe is so ginormously big and so ginormously old that life in the universe is almost a chance of existing, is almost a certainty, even though it's so small. And that's a paradox that in science makes it actually beautiful for me. The math of it is amazing. Even though the number's small, because you're trying so many times in so many places for so long, life on the universe is probably not unique to the Earth. In fact, it would be a surprise if life was only on the Earth because the universe is so ginormous. Chances are there's plenty of stars out there with life on them, and it's only a matter of time until we find evidence of that out there too. Now, one other thing I wanted to do in this video is deconstruct one of the arguments that is used to talk about the odds of abiogenesis as something very impossible. And without getting into detail about the astronomical odds of life, let's talk about the odds of the simplest protein in the human body forming by random chance alone. Remember, the proteins are built of links of amino acids, which are building blocks for proteins. Now, these amino acids are already complex molecules, and the chances of these complex molecules forming by chance are already astronomically small. But we're going to keep that out of the math just to make things simpler. But by the way, we have shown in the laboratory that it is possible for these molecules to assemble themselves by chance. And we're going to talk about more about that in this lecture series. But assuming then that you already have these amino acids in place, and that the simplest protein is actually made up of a link of 27 of these amino acids. So you're going to have 1 through 27 of them all placed in exactly the right order. Now the thing is that there's 20 different versions of these amino acids. So the chance of any one amino acid being in the right link, in the right position, is always 1 out of 20. Because there was 20 others that could have fit in that position. So the chance of the first one being in the right place is 1 out of 20. The chance of the second one being in the right place is 1 out of 20, and so forth, all the way to the end of the protein. Now, since there are independent events, the chances of all the amino acids being in the right place of the chain is 1 out of 20 times 1 out of 20 times 1 out of 20, 27 times, or 1 out of 20 to the 27th power. And that is the chance of the simplest protein in the human body to form itself by chance alone. And that's an astronomically small number. Now, just to show you how small that number is, let's actually do that in a calculator and see how small that number is. If you do 1 divided by 20, it's 0.05. So the chance of the right amino acid being in the right place is only 5% chance. But you got to raise that to the 27th power. So now you have 7.45 times 10 to the negative 36. That is an incredibly small number. It's almost like putting 0.0000000 several times and then putting a 1. That's the same thing as a 0. But remember, it's not actually 0, so there's still a chance of it happening. But still, such an astronomically small chance that we must say there is no way that could have possibly randomly have occurred. There is no chance that that protein could have been made by chance. This to show how small of that chance that actually is. Let's look at the number of seconds in the history of the universe. There are 15 billion years in the universe? Well, not really. But let's exaggerate and say there is 15 billion years. So just to help things along, let's give the universe actually more time than it actually has had. So that's 15 followed by 9 zeros. Now you multiply by 365, you get the number of days in the history of the universe. You multiply that by 24, that's the number of hours. Multiply by 60, the number of minutes. Multiply by 60, the number of seconds. That is the same thing as 4.73 times 10 to the 18th power. That is how big the universe is in seconds. Now remember, the number that we talked about before in the odds of the simplest protein was 10 to the 36, right? Now the seconds of the history of the universe is 10 to the 18th. Now, these exponents are actually double to each other almost. And if you actually do the math here, you will see that this number on top, the number on the bottom can fit on it 10 to the 18 times. Now, what that means is that if you get a 0, a 1, and put zeros next to it, and you keep putting zeros 18 times, that is almost twice as many zeros as you have in a billion, right? So it's much more than a billion. It's a billion billion. And you put all those zeros next to each other, that is how many times per second of the history of the universe life would have to have attempted to create the simplest protein there is in the human body. If it tried that many times per second, every second since the universe started, if the universe was 15 billion years old, which it's not, it would have to try 10 to the 18 times per second just to make sure that the simplest protein was actually made, because that is how many permutations exist in that simplest protein. It makes you really think that that chance of that is 0. But if you think about how many stars, how many planets, and how many solar systems, and how many galaxies exist in the universe, the universe has way more than 10 to the 18th attempts per second. And then there's another problem with this argument altogether. You are assuming that their life had to start with the simplest protein in the human body. And that's ridiculous, because the human body is already a very complex thing. The simplest protein didn't start with 27 amino acids. It was maybe just 2 amino acids strung up by chance together. But perhaps that gave that structure an advantage. And then it's not just math anymore. It's not random anymore. Now natural selection takes place. So you have to remember that the origin of life is one thing. But once life is in place, however simpler life was, and life did not start with 27 amino acids, it started with a lot less. And the chances of a simple amino acid chain forming is actually quite feasible. If you only have 3 amino acids, the chances of that are going to be 1 times 20 times 1 to the 20 to the 3rd power, which, yes, is a small number, but not that small that it couldn't randomly have occurred. In fact, the chance of that is quite reasonable. And then you have to realize that once you have that simpler protein, natural selection would take place, and now it's not random anymore. So that's the problem with that argument. You're assuming that you have to start with the most complex protein, but it's not. Life started with very simple structures, which then, once natural selection took place, actually accelerated the process. And then you have sexual reproduction, which accelerated the variation and evolution even more. And we're talking all about this thing in this lecture series. So remember, the odds of life, although very small, is actually misunderstanding if you say life is random, because life is not random. Mutations are random, genetic drift is random, but natural selection is not. And you did not have to start with something complex. It started with something simple. And from that simple thing, if it gave an advantage, it became more complex. And that is the key in what we talk about in this lecture series. But careful with arguments that seem scientific, seem mathematical, but are actually based on bad logic.